Hi, I'm Terry Wood from PokerRailbird.com, and welcome to the first video in our three-part series titled Reasons to Raise. In this series, we're going to dive deep into the various reasons you should be raising in poker, and trust me, there's more to it than meets the eye. In this first video, we'll be discussing the three fundamental reasons why players raise: to thin the field, to gather information, and to take control of the hand. We'll also address the common preflop rule that suggests you should always raise if you're entering the pot. Spoiler alert, that advice doesn't always hold up under scrutiny. The key to winning at poker is understanding the rationale behind every action you take. If you can't clearly explain why you're raising or making any other move for that matter, it's a sign that you might need to rethink your strategy. So let's dive in and explore the primary reasons for raising and how each can help you make more profitable decisions at the table. The first reason to raise in poker is to thin the field. Now, what does that mean? Simply put, it's about reducing the number of players in a hand. The more players you're up against, the more likely it is that someone will outraw you, even if you start with a strong hand. When you raise, you apply pressure on your opponents, forcing them to decide whether their hand is strong enough to continue. This pressure often leads weaker hands to fold, leaving you to compete against fewer opponents. And this is exactly what you want, because fewer opponents mean fewer chances for someone to catch a better hand than yours. But remember, the goal isn't to raise just for the sake of it. The goal is to raise with intention, aiming to thin the field, provide information, and increase your odds of winning. And this is where raising for value often comes into play. When you believe you have the best hand, raising not only increases the pot size, but also reduces the number of opponents, making it easier for your strong hand to hold up. It's also crucial to note that the strength of your hand shouldn't dictate the size of your raise. Whether you're holding pocket aces or pocket eights, your raise size should be consistent. If you vary your raise sizes based on your hand strength, observant opponents will start picking up on your tendencies. Consistency is key in keeping your opponents guessing. Let's look at an example with pocket queens. If you're playing against just one opponent, your hand has about 80% equity. That's a very strong position to be in. But what happens if more players enter the hand? If there are 4 players in the hand, including yourself, your equity drops significantly to around 53.5%. Suddenly, your once dominant hand is much more vulnerable. This illustrates why thinning the field is so important. The fewer opponents you face, the better your chances of winning the pot. Now, when you're raising preflop to thin the field, you never want to raise more than what it takes to achieve the desired result. If a raise of 3 times the big blind is enough to thin the field, that's great. If you can accomplish it with just 2 times the big blind, even better. The key is to be efficient with your raises, but never exceed 5 times the big blind. Here's why. When you raise more than 5 times the big blind, you're putting yourself in a position where you need to win a very high percentage of the time, and that's just to break even. For example, if you raise 6 times the big blind, you need to win about 66.7% of the time to break even. That's a lot of pressure, even with a strong hand, and it's not a situation you want to find yourself in regularly. And what if you're raising 5 times the big blind and still getting 6 or more callers? Stop raising. We've all been in games where they play everything, anything, and even players at the table next to us are calling our raises. I've been in games where I said they played any 2 cards, but the fact was they played every 2 cards. At that point, you need to adjust your strategy. Continuing to raise in that situation won't have the desired effect. You're obviously at a very loose table, so the best move is to tighten up your hand range. Not only is this the logical thing to do, but it's also the mathematically correct strategy. So the key takeaway here is this: raising to thin the field is about maximizing your chances of winning by reducing the competition. Make sure your raises are effective, consistent, and purposeful. Never more than what's necessary to get the job done. The second reason to raise in poker is to gather information. When you raise, you put your opponents to the test, forcing them to reveal more about the strength of their hands. The decisions they make, whether to call, fold, or re-raise, can provide you with valuable insights that help guide your strategy. Let's break this down with a practical example. You're on the button, holding ace of spades and the queen of spades. The flop comes the queen of diamonds, the 7 of clubs, and the 8 of spades, giving you top pair with the top kicker and a backdoor nut flush draw. The pot is $75, and the player under the gun bets $50 into the pot, making it $125. It folds around to you. What should you do? At this point, you have a strong hand, but there's always the possibility that your opponent could have flopped a set. However, the odds of them having a set are around 7.5 to 1. With that in mind, you decide to raise the bet to $150, making the total pot $275. Now, this raise accomplishes a couple of things. First, it forces your opponent to make a difficult decision. If they want to continue in the hand, they need to call another $100, which would make the pot $375. This gives them 3.75 to 1 pot odds. If they're on an open-ended straight draw, they're around 4.88 to 1 to hit their straight on the turn. By raising, you've made it an unprofitable call for them in the long run, which is exactly what you want. But that's not all. If your opponent does call, you've gathered valuable information about their hand. Their willingness to continue in the hand despite unfavorable pot odds suggests that they might have a stronger holding than just a draw, which you'll need to consider as you approach the turn. Raising here isn't just about protecting your hand. It's about forcing your opponent into making incorrect decisions and gathering critical information that can help you navigate the rest of the hand. The more effectively you use raises in these situations, the more profitable your decisions will become. Now, let's move on to the third primary reason for raising in poker, taking control of the hand. When you raise, you're not just increasing the size of the pot, you're asserting dominance over the table. By taking the lead, you're putting your opponents on the defensive, forcing them to react to your actions instead of the other way around. Imagine you're in a hand where everyone has checked around to you on the turn. You see an opportunity and decide to raise, even if your hand isn't the strongest. This move can often take control of the pot because you've put your opponents in a difficult spot. Now they have to decide whether their hand is strong enough to continue. Most of the time, players will fold weaker hands, allowing you to take down the pot uncontested. But taking control isn't just about aggression, it's also about managing the size of the pot. By raising, you can dictate the terms of the hand. You can protect your strong hands by making it more expensive for drawing hands to see the next card, and you can also keep the pot size in check if you prefer to avoid building a monster pot with a marginal hand. Let's take a closer look at the math behind this. Say you raise on the turn and your opponent is on a flush draw. By raising to an amount that makes it mathematically incorrect for them to call, you're forcing them into a mistake if they chase their draw. For example, if the pot is $150 and you bet $100, you're giving them only 2.5 to 1 pot odds, while their flush draw has about 4 to 1 odds to hit on the river. In this situation, their call would be a mistake, and that's exactly what you want as a skilled poker player, forcing your opponents to make decisions that favor you in the long run. So, raising not only allows you to seize control of the action, but also helps you make your opponents pay to catch up. And in poker, making your opponents pay for their mistakes is one of the best ways to win. Before we wrap up, I want to take a moment to address a common piece of advice you've probably heard. Always raise pre-flop if you're going to enter the pot. While this might seem like solid advice at first glance, it's important to understand that this rule isn't always correct. In fact, there are several reasons why blindly following this advice can lead to mistakes at the table. First, let's talk about hand strength and deception. Not every hand warrants a raise. For example, speculative hands like small pairs or suited connectors often benefit more from seeing a cheap flop. Raising pre-flop with these hands can sometimes reveal the strength of your hand, reducing your chances of surprising your opponents. Mixing up your play by occasionally limping or calling pre-flop adds an element of deception to your game, keeping your opponents guessing about your hand strength. Then we have table dynamics. In games where players tend to call raises frequently, raising pre-flop might not achieve the goal of thinning the field. Instead, it could build a large pot with multiple players, making it more challenging to win without a strong hand. Position also plays a key role here. If you're out of position, raising can lead to tough post-flop decisions. In these situations, limping or calling might be a better strategy, allowing you to see how the action unfolds before committing more chips. Another factor to consider is exploiting weakness. By limping or calling pre-flop, you can sometimes lure weaker players into the pot. This can set up opportunities to outplay them on later streets. If you always raise pre-flop, you might scare off these weaker players, missing out on potential winnings. Strategic limping can also be a powerful tool, especially when you're holding a strong hand and want to induce a raise from aggressive players behind you. Stack sizes and pot control are also important considerations. If you're playing with a medium stack or approaching a critical point in a tournament, raising preflop might commit too many chips relative to your stack size. In these situations, a more cautious approach like limping or calling can preserve your stack while still allowing you to see a flop. Similarly, if you have a marginal hand, raising preflop can inflate the pot and make post-flop decisions more difficult. Sometimes, it's better to keep the pot smaller and retain flexibility in your decision-making. Finally, opponent types matter. If you're up against overly aggressive players who frequently 3-bet or 4-bet, raising preflop can put you in tough spots where you're forced to play a large pot out of position or with a hand that doesn't play well post-flop. In these cases, it might be better to limp or call and see how the hand develops before committing more chips. So, while raising preflop is often a strong play, especially with premium hands and in favorable positions, it's not a hard and fast rule. Poker is a game of nuance, and being flexible in your approach will often yield better results than blindly following any single set of static rules. Always consider the situation, your opponents, and your hand strength before deciding whether or not to raise. There you have it, the 3 primary reasons for raising in poker: thinning the field, gathering information, and taking control of the hand. By understanding these fundamental concepts, you can make more informed and strategic decisions at the table. Remember, raising isn't just about showing strength. It's about using the right tool for the right situation. But we're not done yet. In our next video in this series, we're going to dive even deeper into the strategy of raising. We'll explore advanced reasons for raising, such as raising for value, exploiting your opponent's tendencies, and raising for protection to safeguard your vulnerable hands. These advanced concepts will help you refine your play and make even better decisions at the poker table. If you like our content, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on our next video. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you at the tables.